Hello, hello, hello. So, before I recorded this podcast, I went on Reddit. I went on Irish Reddit and I asked the question, how do you know when an Irish person has feelings for you? And here is a short potted list of some of the answers I got. 1. They ignore you when they're sober, but don't leave you alone when they're drunk. 2. They make fun of you. 3. To be honest, I had no idea if he even liked me back then, but now here we are, we're getting married. Ladies and gentlemen, Kalini August Bukali, welcome to Healing from Irishness. And this week, we're going to be talking about love. All right, welcome back. Thank you for continuing to listen. Just want to clear up a couple of things before we get into this theme today. First thing I kind of want to clear up, but I'm not an historian. I have like a bit of like school knowledge of the history of Ireland. So I'm going to get facts wrong. You know, if I ever talk about the past, I'm probably going to get it wrong. Well, my area of expertise is the present. I'm really good at the now. So if I get facts wrong and stuff like that, like maybe just don't sweat that part because I'm not sweating it so much. You know, I'm more really interested in the now. And when I talk about stuff, you know, like if I reference history, if I reference the Brits, if I reference our parents, if I reference the Catholic Church, etc., we don't need to blame these people, institutions, these energies. You know, we could just sort of look and go, well, that happened. And now our work, all of the work that we're trying to do is just sort of move on from a place of empowerment. Do you ever feel how blame sits in your body? It makes you small. One of the things I'm going to keep talking about on this podcast is how we are energy. And if you can recognize that energy has two directions, it can contract or it can expand. And when we are blaming others, when we are falling into this place of victimhood, I'm going to do an episode on victimhood in the future. But when we fall into that energy, we contract. It doesn't do us any good. It doesn't do us any good at all. We can acknowledge the past, but let's live in the present. Also, speaking of present, some people still writing to me saying, hey, get me on, want to be a guest, want to talk to you on your podcast. It's not going to be that kind of podcast. It's me just talking because I have a lot to say. And today I have a lot to say about love. So when I talk about love, I always go back to M. Scott Peck's definition. M. Scott Peck, he wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. It was a new age book from the 70s. Very beautiful book, which really speaks about the spiritual imperative of love as a force for change. And his definition of love is this: love is any effort to help someone grow. So, using that definition, exploring love is any effort to help someone grow. So that means love can also be letting someone leave your life. It can also be allowing someone make their own mistakes. It can be speaking the truth to a person. How often are we afraid to actually speak the truth to people? How often are we caught up in these sort of complicit bargains? Do you know what I mean? Where I'm not going to say that thing that I feel. I'm not going to say that thing that I believe because it could rock the friendship. It could rock the relationship. So this is not love because we are not helping someone grow. And it's interesting to kind of look as we're looking at what love is this effort to help someone grow. It can often be speaking truth. It can be being authentic. It can be letting go of release, letting go of any control we have over people. And what's interesting in this aspect is to look also at what is not love. And Jung has a beautiful quote here. And the quote is, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking." So often we confuse love and control. This is a huge thing in Irish society. We are so scared of losing what little affection we have. We're so scared of losing whatever connections that we have, that rather than really courageously loving, risking it all. That's what courageously loving is. It's risking it all. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to maybe fall into conflict. I'm going to let this person go. All of these things are how we courageously risk love. But that's not really the mode of relating in Ireland. The mode of relating for so many of us in Ireland is a form of strategy and control. We just don't want the person to leave. That's the objective. It's the objective of so many of our relationships with our friends, with so many of our relationships with our family, within our romantic relationships. Our objective is not, how can I bring the best out of this person? How can I love this person into this place of deep empowerment and sovereignty? No, it's how can I keep them from walking away? And let's understand this. And again, here I'm going to drop a little bit into history, but Jesus, the amount of abandonment in Irish history, the amount of stories of people who had to leave, who had to disappear. I do a lot of work with Irish Americans and Irish Australians, and so many of their origin stories, the granddad who came over was like a 15-year-old who was sent to like build train tracks in fucking Oklahoma or something like this. Do you know what I mean? Who would have been maybe the eighth kid in a family of 12 and was probably just said, here, look, we don't have enough for you, so you've got to go. So the abandonment, the deep fear that they will walk out the door, the deep fear that I will be left alone, is such a huge part of our energetic memory. And this prevents us from truly, truly loving. It prevents us from really courageously loving, because the objective in so many of our connections and so many of our relationships is simply, how do I hold on to them? How do I keep them on a short leash? How can I keep saying the right thing so that they come back? And in this way, we don't grow. Some of the most beautiful moments I've ever had in friendships, certainly the most beautiful moments in relationships, have been when the person has really, really shared their truth with me. Something I believe, I don't think you should marry anyone. I don't think you should commit to anyone for a very long term unless you have actually gone through a breakup with them, or come right to the edge of a breakup. And by breakup, I mean you've come to that place of being no holds barred. I am going to speak my absolute truth to you. Because when you get that truth out, like the real feelings, the real resentment, the real kind of pent up emotions, the pent up frustrations that often kind of exist in relationships, when you can get them out and make peace afterwards, then you know that you are really, really loving the other person. Really loving them. Now, that's not, my recommendation isn't go break up with the person we love, but get to that place, get to that level of conversation, that level of truth. There's something very beautiful in that. But why can't we get to that place of truth? Why are we so insecure about our connections? Why are we so afraid that people will leave us? Now, at one level, you could say this is connected to history. It's connected to the history of abandonment. It's connected to the history of death. It's connected to the history of migration. People had to go. Um, but also, it's deeply related to the themes in our previous episode, Shane Lingo, where so many of us grow up with this idea that we are not worthy of love. If you don't feel that you are worthy of love, then you're not going to risk losing any of the pieces of love that you already have. You're not going to really take any chances there, because you're gonna be in this place of imagining that for you, love is a very scarce thing. For you, love is not that frequent. Love is not flowing. Love is just what's there, and you better do your hardest work possible just to hold on to it. And this is the problem with so many of us. We don't feel worthy of love. We don't really love ourselves. And this, in turn, makes it impossible for us to receive love out in the world. There's a lovely old maxim, an expression. A maxim is just a sort of a term, a kind of a collection of words that potentially opens you up to a whole new range of perception. And this maxim comes from the alchemical tradition, and it just says, the mirror only smiles when you do. And what it refers to the fact that reality is a reflection of your internal relationship. So if you don't love yourself, you don't receive love in the world. And this is at the heart of so much of our problems. I speak to Irish people day in, day out. And the one thing that keeps reoccurring in all the conversations is how difficult it is for us to actually say that we love ourselves. So the lack of love, it's like a decay in all of us. And it seeps out, because again, like I said, we're just energy. And the energy has to go somewhere. I remember my grandmother. My grandmother was a very loving woman, and had so many grandchildren, and they all loved her, and she remembered details about them and was so kind to them. But I always remember an interesting thing when you'd go to her house. She was mean to her dog. That the dog would be sent to bed whenever we came around. The dog would be kind of shouted at. And I always remember not quite understanding this, seeing like, oh, here's this woman who's full of love, or I'm told loves me very much, and I feed it in, the little €5 that would be given to me, or back in the day, like £1 or 50 pence, or the brown bread that she baked me all the time. But this meanness would emerge, this resentment would emerge towards her dog. And I think it's just important to sort of recognize, again, as one of the things that I sort of spoke about in the last episode, is this shed load of trauma that's in us, the experience of leanness that we've had, especially when you come back to think of like our great-grandparents' generations and older, how little there was, and how, children in so many of these homes were just another mouth to feed. There wasn't this idea of pay attention to the child or listen to the child. And so many of us grew up feeling neglected and feeling unworthy. And that feeling of unworthiness then led us and led those older generations to live inauthentic lives. They did things they didn't want to do. If you do something for long enough that you don't want to do, the thing that will develop in you is a form of resentment. you will become angry, and that anger has to go somewhere. That anger will either go into turning cancer cells on in your body, making you sick, or it'll come out in little forms of resentment. It'll come out in meanness. When I think of Irish society today, I see like a lot of cruelty here. You know, the cruelty that exists in, say, the older generations who just don't allow younger generations to get started. There's a kind of a meanness there. There's a lack of care, a lack of love. And this cruelness, this cruelty that we can sort of see exhibited in society, it has its roots in our self-talk. It has its roots in just how we are to ourselves. When we don't love ourselves, and when we kind of harbor this meanness to ourselves, it has to emerge somehow. It has to go somewhere. And it'll either come out in an attack on ourselves, or it'll come out in a meanness towards others. And this is the love that we can work on right now. And this is really important, because the most important thing that any of us can do in our journey in life is begin to love ourselves. The most important thing that you can do in terms of self-help and development is just to begin to love yourself. Yet, in our society, that is the one thing that is considered the worst thing anybody can do. To love yourself, as an Irish person, to love yourself in Irish society is kind of deemed to be like a pitiful place to be. You know, it's a horrible place to be. I remember when I brought out the truth about love, one magazine, they ran this headline, and it said, "This man loves himself." And I remember feeling this sense of like, oh, Jesus Christ, like that's horrible. It's horrible to be considered that way. It's horrible to be, what are people going to think? Yet, what I hoped it was sort of speaking to was that I cared more about what I thought of myself than what others did. I cared more about my relationship with me than with others. And this is where it's really, really important that we begin to kind of learn how to love ourselves and begin to kind of courageously move into this place of loving yourself as the most important thing you can do. And the way that we do that, but the way that I say it's the most important thing you can do, because it's the only thing that really matters. You know, I'll speak to people who come to me and they'll say, "Connor, I can't find a relationship. I can't find, you know, I'm lonely and I'm miserable." And the thing that I always come back to is like, oh, you know, when you truly love yourself, you never feel alone. When you really, really love yourself, you create so much magnetism that beauty just rolls towards you every day. And this is the thing that's so missing from so many Irish people, because we have been fed the story that our love, the love that we generate, the love that we create, it must go out. Our love must be a form of service. It in many ways, again, I've spoken about this, I think, on Instagram, this idea of like, we're so liked. And of course we're so liked because we're the fucking helpers of the world. You know, we're the rescuers, we're the people pleasers of the planet, because we have been conditioned. We've had this drilled into us from the youngest of ages that your love must be in service. You've grown up and you've known like, oh no, I have to take care of my brothers and sisters. I have to take care of my mother. I have to be a good little girl or a good little boy and go to mass. I have to like get these exam results to please the parents. All of this, we're always taught that our love, this energy, must go outside. And then we get the rare example. We get the rare example of someone who loves themselves. We get the rare example of someone who really kind of brings their love inwards. And they're so inspiring. They're so inspiring by what they do. And when you bring your love inwards, when you really begin to say, no, I'm going to focus my love on me, it's very, very simple because it just means that you start to nourish your gift. So we all have gifts. You know what your gift is. Deep down, it's there. And for a lot of us, we've been so long fixated on sharing our love. We've been so long fixated on love as a form of service that we're really disconnected from this idea of a gift. But it's there. You'll notice it in jealousy. You'll notice it in admiration. You'll notice it when you get moved by somebody else. Your gift is simply your impetus. It's the direction. It's the kind of the energy inside of you that wants to move in a certain place. For me, I feel it's just talking into microphones at the moment. But in 5 years' time, it could be something else. The important thing is that you just feed it. That's all. You can look on your gift as a Tamagotchi that just needs to be fed every day. And when you don't feed it, it dies. And something inside of you dies too. I know myself, like I remember when I first ever sort of like began to kind of out myself as spiritual and began to kind of talk about it on social media. This struggle in me, just this sense of like, oh, this is so selfish, it's so self-indulgent, I shouldn't be doing this. But as I kind of just courageously took risks, as I began to do it more and more, as I began to feed my gift and not question the direction of it, I not question what it was going to be. Just like, okay, I will feed whatever this thing is, this animal growing inside of me, I will feed it. And whatever direction it decides to grow in, I will continue to feed it. It's not me to question it. It's just me to caretake it. And as I did that, there was a whole explosion of new things in my life. My life was taken in a very different direction. And in tandem with this feeding your gift, the other thing you have to do is you have to protect your peace. And this is often the hardest thing. When we are trained, when we are brainwashed to believe that we must be in service, that to love is to always be available, to always pick up the call. Whenever a friend says, hey, I'm going to need you, you never say no. The work here is learning, actually, I don't have the energy for this right now. I'm going to say no. It's important for me to say no right now. And that is so hard for us as Irish people. Remember as well when I first stopped drinking. And I say first stopped drinking because I've stopped drinking on a few different occasions and then gone back again. But I remember when I first stopped drinking, just feeling this immense sense of guilt that I was destroying the crack. I was no longer contributing to the crack. And my friends would say, what are you not coming out for a pint for? And I would say, oh, I'm not drinking. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not drinking. The guilt that I was deciding to love myself and set this boundary in my own life. And that's how we are. This is how we are. And it's so important that we can learn to protect ourselves from this. In many ways, I feel that so many of us move abroad because it's easier to set boundaries when we're not deeply enmeshed in Ireland. I know for me, it was kind of when I moved to places like Berlin and that, where I kind of was surrounded by German culture and German conditioning. And then it was a place, as we all know, the Germans had no problem with conflict and they had no problem saying no. And I learned from that. The Germans taught me boundaries. Dankeschön. Boundaries that I wouldn't have learned in Ireland because I was so programmed to people pleasing. And so this is what we have to do. We have to love ourselves. And we love ourselves by protecting our peace and by nourishing our gifts. It's really simple. The hardest part is often protecting the peace because we have such an insecure relationship with love that we will gladly allow vampires and parasites and all sorts of people into our world just with the hope of attention. We grow up so often with all these relationships that drain us, that don't feel good, but we're like, but they make me feel of use. And that's something. And this is the big work for us. It's all about self-love. It's all about having the bravery to just really go for it and love yourself. And when I say this, I know it's not easy, I know that for so many of us, we grew up feeling that maybe we weren't really loved. And I feel that. And I think it's also important to say to yourself, I didn't get the love I needed, but also recognize that your caregivers, the people who were entrusted with loving you in their own specific way, were doing their very best. That can be a hard pill to swallow sometimes, and often we can carry a lot of resentment towards our parents. But much of the work of self-love is recognizing that those who were supposed to give me love were incapable of doing that, but they still kind of did their best. And this doesn't mean that we have to forgive people, but it's so important that we can learn to drop the resentment. Maybe dad never told you that he loved you, but he drove you to the airport after you came and visited. Or maybe mom never said a kind word. Maybe it was all criticism, but her criticism was just her trying to protect you from the hardness she'd experienced. And this is often so much of what we have to do. I feel like our families are inescapable. We are branches and they're the trunks. And we can recognize, okay, these people didn't do well by us. And perhaps they conditioned us to just copy the lives that they lived. Or perhaps their way of loving us was just to try and control us. But now this landing on you, this information coming to you, and you receiving this information and you understanding this information means that you are much more advanced than they ever were. You have much more emotional intelligence than they have. And it's so important that you can love yourself, even though you haven't been loved. And one of the most important steps in loving yourself is letting go of resentment, because that resentment, like I said, is an energy. It's there. It needs to go somewhere. It will emerge in meanness. Maybe like my grandmother with her meanness towards her dog. Maybe like a lot of the older generation in Ireland with their meanness towards kids. Maybe it'll even just emerge in a meanness towards you. You won't talk nicely to yourself. You'll torture yourself at night before you go to bed. You'll look in the mirror and you'll say horrific, malicious things about how you look. Love yourself. It really is the most important thing you can ever do. And that just simply means protecting your peace and nourishing your gifts. And that requires so much bravery. But it can be done. When I think back on my own journey, and the beautiful thing of making this podcast is that I get to really connect to some of the work that I've done, and I get to re-inhabit some of the states that I had. As I'm preparing for these podcasts, I get to reimagine places I lived in and emotional states that I was in. And when I think about myself now and the amount of love that I have, how I protect myself, how I nourish my gifts, how I truly support the vision, the things that are growing inside of me, it's phenomenally liberating. And I'll tell you this, I almost never feel lonely. because I developed such a beautiful connection, a connection of trust with myself, a connection that I didn't have with my family, a connection that never kind of came to me organically, but I've worked at, and now it's there. And I don't need it. I don't need it from the family. I don't need it from the world because I have it in myself. And by having it in myself, the world just naturally reflects love back to me. It's very interesting. I receive very little negative comments. And I believe that's because I'm protected by the energy of self-love that I generate. And you can too. So that's that. Thanks for listening. If you're interested, do you want to work with me? I do coaching sessions, one-on-ones. I also have a beautiful community, a Patreon community, where we talk about these things. And I just recently released a course. The course is called Healing from Irishness. And you can do this course in your own time, and it will kind of guide you through some of the biggest issues you would experience as an Irish person in terms of the emotional and energetic ghosts and demons that are inside of you. So that's it. Thanks for listening. Grá Mór. Love yous loads. And good luck. Slán. See you soon. Bye bye.